Rebel Moon Director's Cut is out, and the response is enough to shake anybody's ego. Well, if you listen to them anyway.
The sort of online feedback, I don't really look at that.
Even with critics, the original cut was not well liked. Starting with 182 reviews for part 1, which dropped to 8 for the director's cut, and 113 reviews for part 2, which dropped to 6.
If you actually start to look at the internet for opinion about your work, you can really go down a rabbit hole, and that's a dark place.
With the director's cut, it's not that people just think it's bad. It's that no one can be bothered to see it. His first cut left so little impact. Nobody came when the bigger, longer, and uncut version appeared.
You remember how I told you I was raised by Belisarius, regent of the Imperium?
She's got no training for this kind of thing.
But to go to bed with a man and lie to him, she's a woman. She's got all the training she needs.
And no amount of mediocre bedroom scenes could save it. There's also a similar story among the audience, where we started with 10,000 plus reviews for them, which is now just 250 plus, or 1,000 plus to 100 plus. Netflix tried to recreate the hype of the Snyder Cut, but they forgot something important. The reason why so many people wanted the Snyder Cut originally is because the first movie was crap. They thought if he made it himself, he'd be able to fix it. The problem is if you get the same guy to make both movies and cut both movies, well, now he's just making one of them crap deliberately. I mean, come on. Who on earth wrote this?
I've written half of the movies that I've directed. That's a dark place.
The musicians are really going for it now. If it was just more gore and adult stuff, it's like, well, this is the age range I would have genuinely given it. You could kind of understand it. But the problem is, entire story sections are in a different place. The chronology of events is entirely different. People do different things, fix different things. The robot now solves the problem of the ship. It turns out, actually, he was hanging around the people of the planet all the time. And we have character backstories and introductions that simply didn't exist before.
They want to hurt her.
Which leads to the question, if this is the better chronology, if this is the chronology you always intended, why did you make it deliberately incorrect in the first one?
Hello, James.
Who the fuck is James? You could have understood it if they attempted something of, well, we're going to make a movie with 2 different directors, and from the same footage, they're going to put together 2 entirely different movies. But when it's the same bloke, what's the point? I think that contributed to so few people coming back, as well as, you know, just being a terrible movie.
It's the grain piloted against the building so we can't destroy them. Stacked to discover to shoot from. Clever.
There are some elements where I disagree with the critics, though. This is going to be unusual. Like one of the few times Collider actually comes out and criticizes a mainstream movie, Rebel Moon Director's Cut, somehow Zack Snyder's Netflix movies got worse. Admittedly, I only watched the first half. I don't think the movie got worse. I do think the chronology is better. I like that they brought the robot in more, and the character introductions make it a bit more sense. For instance, the robot talked to the girl first, and so he grew to like her, which is why he saved her when she was in trouble. Rather than him just doing it for absolutely no reason whatsoever. My issue isn't so much that the director's cut made it worse, as why wasn't it like this in the first place? That said, it's definitely a bigger movie, but not much better. The slight changes do improve some things. They put some more things in context, and it makes a lot more sense for them to do things like get the spaceship out ready while they're recruiting other people to save the planet, rather than just sitting on their backside for 9 weeks.
That's Kora's dropship. He was in bad shape when I dragged her out.
We could pull it out. It could be a powerful asset.
Making good use of the things that we find.
Wow, it still works.
But just because the timeline is a bit more coherent, it doesn't make it much better, does it? It's more sensible, not much better. And that's a problem when it's now twice as long as the inspiration and still underwhelming. Some of the new scenes add more information about the characters' motives, while others extend already lifeless action sequences. There is even more slow motion in this movie. Here it is at double speed. This is at quad speed. Here's a clip of a guy running in slow motion, who then, at the pivotal moment, transcends normal slow motion into hyper super duper artistic slow motion. Although, ironically, in that fight scene and others, the addition of even more slow motion, it does generally improve the fight scenes, simply so you can't see how slow she moves even at normal speed. The fact you think she's moving slowly because it's slow motion is an improvement over her moving slowly because she doesn't know how to fight. I know, thank God for small mercies. In its new form, Rebel Moon now seems mediocre rather than outright bad. A frequently monotonous fable that confuses volume with intensity and generally resembles cutscenes from a video game that you'll never play, which is my other problem with a director's cut. Okay, somebody else made the movie, you want to come in and fix their mistakes, I understand. But if you've cut the original movie and then you're like, oh, I've got all this extra footage, we could make a longer version, there's a reason why you cut all of those scenes. They were crap and unnecessary. That's why you could cut them in the first place. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're saying, I made a mistake when I made that movie, and that just means you're bad at your job. And if you're bad at your job, I don't want you making a second movie anyway. That's how Taika Waititi keeps getting work.
What you least expect that you're going to want to see is Thor going through a midlife crisis.
Okay, cool.
And it does lead to the other, what I think was meant to be a draw for this movie, that this time, we get to spend more time with Anthony Hopkins. It was very strange how in the original movie, you could get someone as a bigger name as Anthony Hopkins and have him barely in the movie. At first, I thought it was just so expensive they couldn't get him to do much work, but now it seems, no, they did have all the stuff, but they left it for the second bit. It's almost as if they thought that'd be a big draw, that people would come back to see more Anthony Hopkins. Yeah, that didn't work, did it? Swing and a miss. End product resembles a derivative fan film, filled with even more superficial characters and excessive exposition in futile search for an emotional heart. Because it definitely does try to have an emotional heart. That's why you get the story, I will go and fight these evil people, because they came to my planet, wiped out my entire species, and now I'm after revenge. For every single character in the entire show. Although in the director's cut, there is a twist, as they add a character who has that exact backstory. Except this time, rather than getting revenge, she decided to join them. That was nice. Bit of variation, the spice of life. The director's cut lacks anything approaching depth, fails to offer anything worth revisiting, despite adding nearly another 2 hours. It is very much like somebody has offered you a plate of whatever the most boring food is. Broccoli. And despite having suffered through the first time, they now offered you an even larger plate. I'm going, yeah, but this time we put garlic on it. Like, cheers, mate. Yeah, I know you're trying, but I'm actually already bored, full, and I can get a steak and curry. Cheers. It might be made out of dog, but at least it's not broccoli. Its attempts to fill in details from a shallow supporting character to a half-hearted world building only succeed in dragging the whole thing down even further. It all drowns in itself with nothing to show for it. Instead of just resembling a poor imitation of Star Wars, it also rips off Dune. Scenes linger longer and they're edited together slightly differently. Sometimes you get alternate takes, showcasing worse deliveries of lines than there were in the first movie. You have more exposition and longer flashbacks. It fails to add anything emotional or thematic heft to the affair. It's half-baked, overcooked, only eliciting a bemused raising of an eyebrow at how blandly ridiculous the tacked-on splatterings of gore look. It's less a director's cut that offers anything worth revisiting, and more Snyder's glorified rearranging of deck chairs on the Titanic. You might see a new piece of furniture as it sinks down, but it only descends all the faster from the dead weight. The subsequent tiresome final stinger of an added scene that plays more like a threat of more. A new song of mourning at the end that served as a farewell to this sad attempt of sci-fi epic for good. Tell us how you really feel, Collider. Remember, this is the same Collider that thought the shirtless scene in The Acolyte was actually some deep and meaningful storyline about Yord. The subtext does not objectify Yord.
Master Salt.
Instead, it's significant because it shows us the character's priorities, telling us more about him than the same scene would if it was set up differently.
Yord, put your clothes on.
They also absolutely loved She-Hulk and thought Velma was hilarious. And I say that because I want to put in perspective just how bad something has to be for Collider not to like it. You can't even say it's not ideological, as Rebel Moon has girl bosses up the wazoo.
I found her. Scargiver.
Women who are badass. And girl bosses. Even if one of them does have an incredibly strange way of working out if the soil has enough manure in it. It's hard to understand why we need to see the same process of collaboration and violent betrayal play out so many times and at punishing length, as if repetition necessarily added meaning instead of just extra steps. Now that implies that Snyder can do anything else. I don't think that Snyder gave all the characters the exact same story because he thinks, well, you know, I've got to repeat it because it'll really hammer it home to the audience. I think he just thinks that's a good backstory. I also think it's a product of how he's made the movie. All of the villains are incredibly, hilariously cartoon villains. They're so over the top. There's nothing redeeming about them. They don't have any loyalty at all. It's weird to work out why they wouldn't just be shot in the back of the face.
Offer you some advice when dealing with subordinates who need to be kept in place.
Oh, go on, hit him with the cane.
Admiral. Sindri. Please.
He's gonna hit him with the cane. Oh, he spun around and hit the other guy with the cane. I never saw that coming. There's always been a problem with villains in movies where they work with someone and then at the end, rather than paying them, they just shoot them. Why would anybody work with you? Your empire would inevitably fail. And that's what would happen in Rebel Moon. They go to every single place and just annihilate it to the ground. This isn't an empire. They're not expanding anywhere. They never build anything. They don't even take over anywhere. Everyone they meet, they betray and they kill, and that is it. And when you write a world that two-dimensional, when you make your villains so evil, there is really no other story than, well, you know, they just came and killed everything. Because that's all they ever do. They even say in the movie, what are they coming for? Everything. Well, there's no nuance, there's no second story, there's nothing that can happen in that. Either they take everything and everybody dies, or you win.
By saying, you know, Snyder sucks, you're also saying, give me some more focus groups.
I don't think this choice of story was done because he thought it actually had extra weight. I'm not even sure he realized he was repeating the same story. I think he was so intent on making the evil empire, he forgot to realize that these are actually just people. And one of the things about people in power is they like to have people to rule over.
I want Happy Meals.
Too much money is on the screen for the movie's big fight scenes to be flat out ugly. And they are. Largely because you can't see them. Everything is blurred. If you use glasses, probably better not to even put them on. That way, you might be the one person in the entire world who can see it in focus.
What?
It's like the movie's blur and your eyes just sync up and you're the only person who can appreciate the movie. Turgid bloodletting wrought by stick figures whose physical movements are never graceful. True. Everything blends together, often literally, given the eye-straining soft focus camera work and butter-colored lenses. It's also pretty telling that the best new material in this new release is an adult scene. Well,
I didn't become a little bit of a slag, I became a total slag.
Gotta give the fans something, I suppose. When you've sat through multiple hours of Rebel Moon, someone can at least get their kit off. Rebel Moon, whose shameless and uninspired cribbing from superior films makes 6 hours plus seem interminable. Only really sings when objects are exploding or crashing into other things. Campy, joyless, and will never be more than the sum of its well-oiled parts. A slog for everyone else that isn't a Snyder fan. Judging by the reviews, even a lot of those. Joe Blow says, I went as far as watching the original and the extended cut side by side to determine where the main changes are. I'm not sure how that man's alive. Watching them once, months apart, was more than enough for me. But he was surprised by the odd decisions. Surprisingly, the extended cut did not improve the film for me. Proving longer and more explicit doesn't always mean better. He also answers a question where he's on about a dental MacGuffin that recurs through the director's cuts with no reference to its purpose, outside of being sadistic and weird. I've only seen part 1. I just assumed it would be explained in part 2, to be honest. There's a load of people shoving a tooth into a board, and you've got an engine made out of a god that you shovel bones into. I assumed it was going to have a purpose relating to that. No, bring a load of weirdos around with us for absolutely no reason whatsoever, except their hobby art project. That's the kind of thing you could understand being cut out in the first movie, when he realized there wasn't a point to it. It was an idea that never really tied together, and so he cut it on the floor. This is why director's cut don't make sense when you directed the first one. You cut it for a reason. There are more benefits where the backstories of characters are shown rather than just talking about it. And talking about the adult scenes, like, they feel very out of place. They are well shot, presumably something of a connoisseur. Despite having no purpose other than showing skin, and even the living engines of the ships are underbaked plot element that feels added in without much explanation, as you would expect for a director's cut. Some things just didn't work when you were filming them, so they never made it through to the movie. Until Netflix comes along and goes, by the way, we want 2 hours of extra footage. What have we got down here then? Shall we have a look? You just start throwing your own laundry in the movie just to bulk it out for a bit. In Chapter 2, we also changed the sequence, where we moved the training of the villagers to after the harvest scenes, rather than intercutting them. This makes them feel more sequential, but also puts a lot more focus on slow-motion shots of wheat being cut. bundled and hauled back to the village. Obviously, just get a combine harvester.
'Cause I got a brand new combine harvester, and I'll give you the key.
The secret ingredient to our great tasting flour is inefficient labor practices.
Now let's get together in perfect harmony.
Always the sign of a quality movie. Farming. There's more cutting wheat in Rebel Moon than there is in Clarkson's farm. I stopped counting after 15 minutes. But there is a lot of farming stuff added to the film. There is no excuse for more than 15 minutes of harvesting grain put in any movie ever. I don't care if you're making a movie about combine harvesters. Stop cutting the grain. I think that's enough of that twaddle. Director's cuts are intended to serve as the true vision for the filmmaker, but in Rebel Moon, it feels as if the original versions were actually what he was aiming for. Very little of the new footage registers as an improvement over what we already saw. Just seems gratuitous. The film still hinges on the charisma of Sofia Boutella. You failed there then. If ever you want to hinge your movie on the charisma of somebody, shouldn't have been her. It simply makes you slog through 6 hours of visuals for 4 hours of story. And saying that there is 4 hours of story in Rebel Moon anyway, really pushing it. It's generally just like an MMO quest where you go along, do a simple fetch quest to get a companion, and then you're on to the next fetch quest to get the next companion.
If Tarek can break that creature out there, his debts are squared with me.
The movie. The Wrap even agrees with me that the original cuts of Rebel Moon were not well received. Then again, that might have been the plan all along. We were crap deliberately. Netflix stated their intention was to release shorter mainstream versions of Rebel Moon. But if Netflix thought that Snyder's vision was worth releasing, why did they bother to release watered down versions in the first place? If we're happy to show really gory movies on Netflix with adult scenes, why release the one with it all cut out first? At best, you could have released them both at the same time and just considered one to be the general family viewing. It looks like an exercise in manufacturing demand instead of giving fans what they wanted in the first place. And that clearly backfired. The movie is awkward and unnecessary, trying to convince us that the bad guys are bad, and that part was pretty clear. The most obvious change about Rebel Moon is that the characters swear more. A lot more. You see this in the early scene on Velt, where people act genuinely excited to say the F word. It seems that on that planet, that they think that saying that is how crops grow. No, seriously.
Total slag.
The films are cloyingly derivative and relatively shallow. The plot doesn't hang together, and one can't help but wonder, again, what was the point of this? It's hard to shake the idea that Netflix just wanted people to get subscribers to watch the same films twice. Didn't really work. It was actually even hard for me to find the films on Netflix in the first place, bearing in mind they'd just been released, and it was easy to find the originals. We even had Paul Tassi, defender of the Acolyte, coming out and going, well, I watched part 1, I was enough. Considering Zack Snyder said that this is 2 entirely different timelines, it isn't. It's just a bloodier timeline, and fixes practically none of the things wrong with the first draft. When Snyder is at his worst, well, he's at his worst here. And that's coming from somebody who actually likes most of his movies. He truly thought that this was going to turn into some sort of sprawling 6-movie saga with spin-offs and the whole thing. It's not that. That would explain why everything is so shallow, where there's lots of ideas like the tooth art or the engines of the ships are just never mentioned, never explained. They're just there. Oh, maybe in the future we'll tell you about it. The one thing I disagree on is the fact that Tassi thinks that Snyder has 100 pages of backstory for every briefly glimpsed thing in this film, whereas I think he has nothing. It doesn't strike me as if there's depth behind all of this stuff. It strikes me as if we made these strands so we could make depth out of them if we wanted to. It's the mystery box of just showing you the box. And sure, it looks cool on the outside, but there is nothing behind it yet. It feels overly long and bloated, to say nothing of the 3-hour part 2 you're supposed to watch after this. If part 2 does get any better, somebody let me know, because I'm not bothering to attempt it after this. And nor did a lot of the critics. That's how we ended up with only 8 reviewing the first one, and then 6 in the second half. Even the audience dropped off by more than half. And it is a slog to get through these movies. So after somebody has suffered through the first half, come back, and they still only think that the second half is at 65%, which is just 65% of the audience thinks it's higher than a 5. When what you end up with is a movie that is more disappointing than even I expected. And I didn't have high hopes for this, but I did actually listen to what Snyder said about it. That it was an entirely different timeline, an entirely different movie. It was using different shots for everything, and it all changed. And it hadn't. This isn't a new movie. He hasn't listened to criticism from anybody. Not the critics or the dark place of the internet. It's just the same old movie. And don't get me wrong, in a fight scene, I like gore. I just think that everybody would have been more than happy if you just put this in the first movie. You could have had the improved timeline, put in some of the backstories, and added your gore and anything else scenes in the first one, while also not dragging out the film this much. There is definitely a better, tighter movie that you could edit out of this, but the director's cut suffers from the same problem as the first one. The characters are shallow, the script writing is crap, the story doesn't go anywhere. I do think he made a universe that could tell interesting stories. I just don't think Zack Snyder is the one to, well, make them. But those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you liked the video. Subscribe, more videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.